Welcome to the Deep Dive. Our mission today, well, it's focused on a piece of gear that, honestly, for decades, has kind of quietly held this revolutionary secret inside. We are deep diving into the history, the engineering, everything behind the Electro Harmonix Hot Tubes Overdrive. Now, if you think about, the classic drive pedals, the big names, the Hot Tubes often flies under the radar. It really wasn't the mass market bestseller, not the one that defined a whole generation of rock music necessarily. But here's the really critical point. The information we've pulled together, it confirms it introduced this technical trick, a truly radical piece of engineering for its time, that genuinely helped define the sound and even the approach of solid-state drive pedals right up to today. So we really need to figure out why this pretty unassuming box is actually so important and how on earth it did what it did.
It really is the perfect deep dive topic, actually, because it represents this calculated gamble by a company, EHX, that was mostly known for these huge, sometimes really chaotic sounds, right? We're specifically looking at the original Hot Tubes, the one from 1978. And you got to remember the context. This was a really pivotal moment for Electro Harmonix. They were already famous, obviously, for revolutionary effects like the big muff fuzz, the small stone phaser. But those were effects designed to, radically alter your sound. Big changes. With the Hot Tubes, their goal was different. It was much more subtle. They wanted to create a solid-state pedal, no tubes involved, that could genuinely mimic the harmonic complexity, the dynamic response, basically that natural feel of a tube amp being pushed hard. That was kind of the holy grail of Overdrive then, and, well, it still is now, really.
And they were jumping into a really competitive environment, weren't they? Think about the landscape in 1978. The Hot Tubes arrived almost at the exact same moment as two other pedals that would become like absolute global standards.
Yeah.
The MXR Distortion Plus, and of course, the original Ibanez Tube Screamer, TS-808.
Huge names, right.
So EHX wasn't just competing with other types of effects. They were up against very specific, very popular sounds. The Distortion Plus gave you that sharp, kind of aggressive clipping.
Yeah, that hard rock sound.
Exactly. And the Tube Screamer offered that characteristic mid-hump, the compression.
Yeah.
Makes your solos cut through. The Hot Tubes, coming in right then, it feels like it was almost anticipating the modern trend of amp-in-a-box pedals.
Yeah.
They were chasing responsiveness, warmth, not just sheer volume and, dirt.
That's the absolute key distinction. If you look at EHX's big successes up to that point, they were mostly built on transistor-based circuits. The big muff is essentially a stack of transistors clipping the signal like crazy to get that massive saturated buzz. Very different goal. But with the Hot Tubes, the engineers, they must have known that transistors, or even the standard op amps like the ones used in the Tube Screamer, they weren't quite capturing that smooth, rich thing that happens with tube compression and overdrive. Something was missing.
Okay, so let's unpack the innovation itself, because this is where it gets really interesting and, a little bit technical. If they weren't using actual tubes, and they weren't using the standard transistors or op amps, how did they get the gain? Where did the clipping come from?
Right. Well, they took a complete hard left turn. They looked towards, believe it or not, the digital world, or at least components from the digital world. The core of the Hot Tube circuit uses CMOS inverters, specifically the CD40049 chip. These were used as its gain stages. Now, the crucial thing for you to understand here is that CMOS stands for complementary metal oxide semiconductor. And these chips, these 4049s, they're designed for logic. They're digital building blocks.
Lots of chips, like for computers.
Exactly. Think of the CD4049 as a tiny integrated circuit that's designed basically to be a switch. It's either 0 off or 1 on. It deals in binary digital signals. It is absolutely not designed for subtle, continuous analog audio processing. That's not its job at all.
Okay, hang on. If you're taking a chip that's designed for digital switching, like you said, computers, maybe controlling lights or something, and you run a continuous analog audio signal, like from a guitar, through it, wouldn't that just sound awful? Like massive digital noise or just a horrible choppy square wave?
Yeah.
How did they even stabilize the signal? How do you force a digital chip to act like a smoothly clipping tube amp? That seems counterintuitive.
That is the genius of the design. And it answers your question about stability and smoothness. You're right. The standard way to use one of these logic chips is fully on or fully off. Bang, bang! Operating at the extreme ends of its capability. But the aha moment, the real technical insight here, was how they biased the chips. They figured out how to carefully set the voltages around it.
Biasing, like setting the operating point.
Precisely. Instead of just letting the chip slam between its binary extremes, 0 and 1, they tuned the voltage and resistance around it just right to push it and keep it in what's called the linear region.
Okay, explain the linear region. What does that mean in practical terms for the sound, for the listener?
Okay, imagine that digital logic chip is just a simple light switch on your wall. Normally, it's either fully on, light blazing, or fully off, room dark.
Right. On or off.
The linear region is like carefully balancing that switch so that it hangs perfectly suspended right in the middle, not quite on, not quite off. And in that middle state, it allows electrical current to flow continuously, but only partially. So you've essentially turned that on-off light switch into a smooth, continuous dimmer dial.
Ah, okay. So you're forcing it to operate in an analog way.
Exactly. And when you force a digital logic chip to stay in that analog dimmer mode, it turns out it produces this very smooth, often quite symmetrical clipping characteristic as the signal gets louder. And this smoothness, the harmonic content it generates when it clips, it closely mimics the desirable characteristics of an overdriven vacuum tube, which is exactly what EHX was chasing all along. This technique, using a digital logic chip for analog audio clipping, it was genuinely revolutionary for guitar pedals back in '78. Nobody was really doing that.
Wow. That is the ultimate technological hack, isn't it? Taking a component meant for one job, one world, and bending its will, basically, to create this beautiful warmth in a completely different world. Amazing. Now, structurally, the pedal itself stayed pretty simple, right? On the outside.
Oh, yeah. Externally, it was straightforward.
You have your volume control, obviously, for the output level, and the overdrive knob, which basically dictates how hard you're pushing those CMOS chips, how intense the clipping gets.
More dimmer action, effectively.
Right. And some later versions also included a basic tone control for EQ shaping. But the real magic, the core of it, was always internal, running on standard 9V power. Simple stuff on the surface.
And the resulting sound profile is just utterly unique because of that specific clipping architecture. You can hear it. At low gain settings, with the overdrive knob down low, the Hot Tubes really delivers on its promise. You get that classic warm, touch-sensitive drive. It genuinely feels quite a bit like pushing a small tube amp into its natural breakup zone. Cleans up nicely if you roll back the guitar's volume knob, too.
Yeah.
Very responsive.
So it does the edge of breakup thing well.
Definitely. But then once you start pushing that overdrive knob past noon, maybe towards 2 o'clock, it reveals its other identity. It becomes a much thicker distortion. It still retains that harmonic richness, that smoothness that comes from the symmetrical CMOS clipping, but it also develops this unique kind of subtle fuzzy edge. It's a texture that isn't quite the Big Muff's full-on assault, but it's certainly heavier, hairier than most typical overdrives.
Yeah, that texture, that hair.
Yeah.
That's what defines its niche, I think. When you compare it back to that competitive field in '78, it makes perfect sense why it sounded different. The op-amp-based tube screamer, compresses heavily, pushes those mid-frequencies forward. Great for cutting through a mix.
Classic solo boost sound.
Totally. The Big Muff, on the other end, is just highly saturated, scooped, mids maybe, really aggressive fuzz. The Hot Tubes, by contrast, it's known for being less compressed than either of those famous rivals. It offers a wider dynamic range, feels more open. And the sound, our sources, the reviews, they often describe it using words like woollier and rower. It seems to have this distinctive low-end girth, a kind of warmth in the bottom end that really distinguishes it from that mid-focus tube screamer family. It gave players a way to get that natural feeling amp breakup, but this unique underlying texture that felt really organic and responsive.
Yes, that term woolly, I think that really captures it. It refers to that rich harmonic content, especially in the low and low mid frequencies. And that's directly attributable to the specific way those CMOS inverters respond when they're biased, just so. It means the pedal delivers this real warmth without necessarily having to rely on carving out the lows or adding that typical mid-hump EQ curve we see in other designs. It's inherent in the clipping.
Okay, let's talk history a bit, because the name Hot Tubes has actually caused some real confusion over the years. We need to clear this up for you, the listener. The original circuit we've been discussing, the CMOS one from '78, it was housed in that iconic big box original enclosure back then. You know, the one, that large, sturdy, folded steel chassis that characterizes so many classic EHX pedals from that era, like the Deluxe Memory Man, the old Big Muffs.
Bit like tanks.
Yeah. Then jump way ahead, decades later actually, to 2013, EHX released the modern Nano Hot Tubes.
And the good news is that Nano version successfully replicated the original revolutionary CMOS design, just in a much smaller, more compact, pedal board-friendly format. So the core sound is there.
Great. So the Nano is the true descendant.
Yes. But here, and this is really the critical historical distinction we absolutely have to stress, EHX went through a period, I think it was in the 1990s, where they were reissuing various classic models, getting the brand back up and running strongly. And during that time, they released a different pedal, also called Hot Tubes. But this 90s version utilized an actual 12AX7 vacuum tube inside the chassis, a real tube.
Ah, okay. So there's a 2 version and a solid-state CMOS version, both called Hot Tube.
Exactly. And that 1990s tube version, even though it shares the name, it's a completely different circuit design, different sound profile, different approach. It's an entirely separate thing. So it's vital for anyone researching these or maybe looking to buy one, collecting them. You need to remember that the genuine technical breakthrough, the really pioneering part, using that CMOS CD4049 chip to mimic tubes in solid state that lies only in the 1978 original big box and its direct descendant, the modern Nano reissue.
Got it. Very important distinction. Focus on that clever solid-state CMO circuit if you want the original magic. Okay, so why does it matter today? Why are we doing this deep dive? If it wasn't the mega hit that defined, stadium rock, what is its lasting legacy?
Well, I think it really helps contextualize EHX's lasting importance beyond just their, famous radical effects. First, it proved the company could innovate successfully in the really practical, highly competitive field of, let's call them, utility drive pedals. It showed they had versatility beyond just wild flangers and crazy synth effects. They could do nuance, too. Second, and this is probably the most important point for the history of guitar gear, was genuinely one of the very first commercially successful CMOS overdrives. It pioneered that circuit trick using logic chips for analog audio clipping that would eventually become an established, if somewhat niche, design philosophy.
Right, that pioneering status. That's why it achieved what people often call cult status. It's beloved, maybe not by the millions, but certainly by collectors, tone enthusiasts, and particularly by the community of DIY pedal builders and boutique designers. And why them specifically? Because the unusual design provides this specific high-quality sonic result that is clearly distinct from the massive sea of tube screamer clones and other common op-amp or diode clipping drives out there. It offers something different.
And we can actually trace the lineage of this idea pretty directly, that CMOS inverter topology, it didn't just vanish after the initial Hot Tubes run ended. It clearly went on to inspire other high-end boutique builders later on, people who were actively looking for alternatives to standard diode clipping to get different overdrive textures. We see clear evidence, looking at schematics and design approaches of this CMOS idea influencing circuits developed by highly respected companies, names like Lovetone, some were huge designs. They explored similar paths in their overdrive pedals.
Wow, so Lovetone and Way Huge, that's serious boutique credibility.
Absolutely. It means that EHX's somewhat quirky decision back in 1978 to use a cheap logic chip completely outside its intended function, it had a measurable, respected, and genuinely enduring impact on how the entire boutique pedal industry thinks about creating organic, dynamic overdrive sounds without having to rely on actual physical vacuum tubes.
It really is a fantastic story of innovation through adaptation, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just repurposing something common. So, okay, what does this all mean for us, for you listening? The Electro Harmonix Hot Tubes, it really shows how technological bending, taking a component like that digital logic chip, the CD4049, and forcing it way outside its intended purpose can accidentally, or maybe cleverly, lead to real sonic genius. And in doing so, it fundamentally established a new, albeit less common, design philosophy in musical hardware. It's just a powerful reminder that sometimes the greatest breakthroughs come from looking sideways, looking at common, maybe even inexpensive technology in a new way.
And that does raise a fascinating final question for you, the listener, to maybe mull over. Given that the Hot Tubes achieved such a unique and widely praised tube-like sound by using this digital logic chip in a completely non-standard analog way, what other common, maybe inexpensive electronic components, things like simple timer chips or common utility ICs you find everywhere, what sonic possibilities might they be hiding, just waiting for someone to figure out a creative bias application, a weird voltage setup? The Hot Tubes really proves the sheer potential that's still out there for analog exploration, even when you're staring right at digital components. There might be gold in those silicon hills.
That is a great thought to leave everyone with, especially if you happen to have a soldering iron and a curious mind. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the woolly, the raw, and the surprisingly innovative world of the Electro Harmonix Hot Tubes. Definitely go explore those references.